I don't necessarily believe that humans have adapted across the board to eat all plants in whatever quantity that you want to. And so I realized that, well, plants might not be the best source of micronutrients. So what is the best source? Well, from an evolutionary perspective, again, going back, hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years, I realized that, well, humans have consumed a lot of organ meats as their primary source of nutrients.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation. Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Michael Kummer. He is a former professional track athlete turned CrossFitter who launched his own organ meat supplement brand in 2021. Michael is a healthy living enthusiast who helps people improve their health and well-being through his widely read blog and popular YouTube channel. He lives with his wife, Kathy, their 2 children on a small homestead in Georgia, where they maintain a flock of backyard chickens, a pair of beehives, and a dog named Ribeye, a German Shepherd, as a matter of fact, right?
That's right.
Welcome, Michael. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Well, thanks for having me, Damon.
The beehive thing, that is awesome. I'm guessing that you're utilizing the production of honey there.
So we started with the bees 2 years ago, and we decided relatively early on that we don't want to do any treatments. We don't want to do any plastic foundations, to keep it as natural as possible. And the first generation of bees, unfortunately, died over winter. I think there was mite infestation, and wasn't entirely sure why that is, but I didn't want to treat. So I just, let it go, and we got some new ones, and I just did my first hive inspection after winter, and they all look healthy and good. They have plenty of stored honey in there. They're already collecting nectar, so I'm super hopeful that this year we're going to have honey. It was certainly a learning curve, to keep bees and maintain bees, even though they obviously know what they're doing. They don't need us for that. But, once you put them in a box and you want them to do certain things, for the benefit of, getting honey and all of that stuff, it gets a little bit trickier. But it's been a blast, and hopefully this year we're gonna have a good harvest.
Yeah, it's such a good thing, and I wouldn't mind getting into that myself. Just wanted to kind of touch on that a bit. I want to get into some other topics here today. You've got so much to offer. We'll just kind of hit a couple of those and try to get into them a little bit. Give a little bit of a background from your training, your athletic training, the CrossFit. What's been your life journey to this point?
Yeah, so I started track and field when I was, I think, 17 or so, and then quickly realized that this is something that I really want to do. I played soccer and stuff before, but I've never been a really good team player. I always got frustrated if someone else didn't perform to my expectations. And so I found being a solo athlete, still working out in a team and all, but ultimately being responsible for my own performance was better suited my character, I guess, and the way I approach things. And so I started track and field, and I want to say I've never been the most talented athlete in anything that I was doing, but I learned that by just being mentally stronger than anyone else and pushing through the pain, that you can, go places. And so I got actually relatively successful for Austria. That's where I'm from.
Okay.
I was, I think, twice or 3 times Austrian champion, the youngest one since 1945 at the time. And then I made it all the way to number 5 in Europe in my age group, under 19. So I was fairly happy about that. But at some point, I realized that there is no money to be made as a track and field athlete in Austria, unless you play soccer or you ski. You can't really earn any money. And so I decided I want to get more into business, started my own business, moved to Switzerland at some point, and then, long story short, I came to the US. Didn't do anything for a couple of years other than maybe going for a jog here and there. Adopted a standard American diet, coming from the, I guess, standard European diet, which wasn't significantly better, but still better than what I found over here. And knew nothing about nutrition. And one day I looked in the mirror, I'm like, okay, this is not going in the right direction at all. The combination of eating not well and not exercising and not caring about sleep and all of the other things that are important to maintain a healthy life, I didn't really do. And then I met my wife. She's from Costa Rica. And I think it was maybe 2 years into our marriage or so, we saw a Netflix documentary about added sugars. And we're like, okay, let's walk around in our pantry in our house and see how much stuff we have at home that has added sugars. And lo and behold, it was pretty much everything had added sugars. So we started removing that stuff. And from there, we got into a Paleolithic diet, or I did. one day I woke up and said, I'm going to do paleo. That's the right way of eating, and you have to be on board. She wasn't quite happy about my sudden change in diet, but she followed along. She did her research. She agreed, okay, this is probably something we want to do. And from there, I got more and more into nutrition and how we're supposed to eat. At some point, I adopted a ketogenic diet. She followed along. Then we went more into carnivore-ish. Right now, we're on an animal-based diet. And sometime along the way, I decided, okay, I want to work out again too, because I strongly believe that we should be, lifting heavy stuff every day, that we should be moving, we should eat right, sleep well, et cetera, et cetera. And so I started adopting all of those things, and the more I learned, the more it became apparent that, and I'm paraphrasing here the Liver King, our bodies are perfectly adapted for an environment that no longer exists, and I thought, this is really true, because everything that we are doing, everything that humans have invented along the way, be it plastic food storage containers, BPA lined cans, and all of the things that are convenient and that are supposed to make our life easier and better, are completely detrimental to what we should be doing. And so we started making changes, removing all plastics, throwing out all of our skincare products, making sure we only use the stuff that doesn't have any chemicals in there, like xenoestrogens and other endocrine disrupting chemicals, or any other stuff that might be carcinogenic. We started only drinking filtered water, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been a journey. It's been a very long journey, I want to say it's a somewhat complicated journey, because everything that we are trying to do to get towards a better path is completely opposite of how everything is set up. And so that's been a real challenge, especially if you then add in kids and, well, pets in our case, like, Ribeye, he's on a raw diet. He only eats raw meat and organs and bones. And even that, if you go to the vet, they tell you, don't do that. Here's the kibble, that he should be eating. And it's so crazy and such a challenge, but we've managed to find a way of making it work for us. So now we do CrossFit several times a week. I exercise under low oxygen conditions to kind of do all of the things that we have to do, because they don't come naturally anymore. I sit in front of my computer. We are in a climate controlled environment, everything. So I have to make an effort to expose myself to the sun, to stress my body with fasting, with exercise, with all of the things that our ancestors have been exposed to every single day, and they didn't have to do anything about it or for it. They just went on with their life, and they had all of the good stuff going on for them.
There's an amazing design to the human body and just all of life, and how it really is a system, really a homeostasis type design system. And we are interfering with that for sure.
Absolutely.
With all of the processing and different things that you've shared. And you've kind of touched on some of your philosophy, which basically there's a base core of principles that you've developed. I think it's always good to kind of have that foundation of, here's these cores. And when you get into each core, it's the challenge and depth can be very deep. But if you have that core, just kind of share those 5 main pillars that you like to work off of that base.
Yeah. One is sleep. I consider that like a foundation of everything. If I don't sleep well, nothing else matters, and I've, heard stories even from friends, and I might have done it in the past as well, where I would sacrifice sleep to go work out. Doesn't make any sense, I'd rather sleep well these days than do anything else. But sleep is the foundation as far as I'm concerned. Diet and nutrition is obviously a big one. Whatever we put into our bodies, that's the fuel. Those are the nutrients. If we put in something wrong, stuff is not going to go well, maybe not immediately, but definitely in the long run. And we can see that, if you look at the rates of chronic disease and everything, we are, a nation of sick people, or really a world of sick people. How many people you see walking around, and I always do that mental experiment when I'm aboard an airplane. I look who is coming in and I kind of rate them, or healthy, not healthy. Nobody is healthy. It's unbelievable, And so diet and nutrition, exercise is super important. Stress management is definitely something that I think it's often overlooked, even among people who exercise. Exercise is a stressor. Fasting is a stressor. all of the things that we do to get healthier are ultimately stressors that are good. However, if we are already under chronic stress and then we add on those other stressors, I'm not convinced that that's beneficial, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I
So
hope people
stress
can
management.
Yeah, I hope people can catch that. Just to jump in real quick, because it's in my world a lot of times. I'm at the airport looking at how people walk. I'm a chiropractor. How's their posture, how's their gait, all that kind of stuff. But what you're saying is, yeah, they're already under a lot of stress, and a lot of times people will say, "Hey, I just have to push through this." For example, if I have back pain, if I just walk more, it's going to be a better thing. It's like, well, not really. Pain is actually telling you something. The no pain, no gain rule is really limited to elite athletes that are performing for a paycheck, and they're trying to work through pain to be able to perform. But for the everyday person, not a great strategy. So I like where you're going with that.
Yeah, and one thing that I've learned along the way is as well, just because you're physically in very good shape and you can perform really well doesn't necessarily mean it's conducive to your longevity and to your health span. If you look at a bodybuilder, I mean, they are strong as nothing else, but are they the healthiest? I would argue probably not.
Right.
And so physical performance and health don't always go hand in hand. I mean, yes, if you're healthy, then you can perform to a certain level. But if you want to take it up a notch and compete at the Olympics, chances are you're getting into territory that might no longer be healthy, in the long run, at least.
Sure. And it's the kind of thing with ultrasounds and things of that nature. There's some studies out a few years ago, and I don't know what the current studies are, but when you start training your body at that level, it can be negative impact overall on your heart compared to if you would train more in a HIIT kind of way, the high intensity training. So it's that kind of a balance that we're trying to find, right? And you kind of touched on at the start, when we get into any of these, we've got to be careful to not compromise one good pillar for another good pillar, but try to find that balance.
Exactly. So you really want to, and so I think we had now sleep, right? Exercise, diet, stress management. I'm forgetting one. I'm actually about to add one to that article. It's about tribalism and family. I think that's not the one.
And environmental toxins, I think, was
right. And the environmental toxins. That's correct. Yes. And then the family tribalism. I knew about it. I'm trying to make that part of my life, but it's especially in the last 2 years that's become incredibly challenging because not everyone wanted to see you necessarily for whatever the reasons might have been, because of fear or
sure,
whatever.
Over the last couple of years.
Yeah. But I've come to realize that humans are not meant to be by themselves, for extended periods. We are a tribal kind of species, and we've always lived in tribes and moved around in tribes, and it's really the modern philosophy is to be, okay, I want to make a career or do this or that, and I'm by myself because nobody's going to help me and I have to do it. But in reality, if you think back, I'm not where I am right now because I did it by myself. I was put into certain positions, I was supported whether or not I realized it, and that's what made me successful. If you can consider it a success of where I am, but for me, at least personally, it is. But it was not because of me, it was because of everything else, and I just leveraged the opportunity.
Even if you were I would go throw this out at you and would like your thought on it. But even if you were a person that was fairly isolated, you would never be able to say that you were developed on your own, because everything that's in place. Right. As soon as you break out of the womb, you might think that you're isolated, but at the end of the day, you're dependent on that culture and on that, what has been the stepping stones before us, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we've really made it a point to meet up with friends more often, hang out, socialize more. Basically, as to always do the exact opposite of what you're told, right? From
right. Yeah,
mainstream.
Systematic approach to things is kind of a scary thing, because it's kind of gone sideways here the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah.
And within those 5 pillars, there was a couple of things right in the intro. I wanted to have you touch on the nutrition thing in a couple of ways. One is the organ meats. Share a little bit about what you found with organ meats, your study, and how you use them, and some of the benefits.
Yeah. So I was brought up with eating your vegetables every day because that's where the nutrients are.
Mm-hmm.
And while it is true that many plants do have nutrients in various qualities and shapes and forms, it's also a fact that no living species, be it plant-based or an animal, wants to be eaten, right? And so what do animals do? Well, they run or they fight, right, to avoid
Sure.
being eaten. What do plants do? Well, for the most part, they don't run, right? Some have thorns, to deter someone from eating it, but most use chemicals to deter you from, eating them, especially, the stems, the seeds, and certain parts of the plant that are
Mm-hmm.
important to the survival. And so I realized that, well, those chemicals aren't necessarily good for us. They are meant to deter us and animals as well from eating them. Now, some animals have adapted. I don't necessarily believe that humans have adapted across the board to eat all plants in whatever quantity that you want to. And so I realized that, well, plants might not be the best source of micronutrients. So what is the best source? Well, from an evolutionary perspective, again, going back, hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years, I realized that, well, humans have consumed a lot of organ meats as their primary source of nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you think about, maybe 200,000 years ago, a carrot back then was nothing like a carrot today. It was not sweet and big and juicy, and you didn't want to eat the carrot from 200,000 years ago. It was a fibrous kind of thing, and you still see some of that if you go to Africa and visit some of those modern hunter-gatherer tribes. They chew on that stuff and then spit it out because it's so fibrous that you can't really,
Yeah.
digest it.
Yeah.
And so by looking at organ meats, I'm like, well, even my grandma, even my parents to a degree, ate organs. And because that's where all the nutrients are. I mean, it always was a cheap food. It's typically my parents and grandparents probably ate it because it was cheap and they couldn't afford the steak, you know.
Right.
But that's really where all the nutrients are. I mean, liver alone has over 25 vitamins, minerals, coenzymes, and cofactors and peptides that are important for us in the most bioavailable and absorbable form. So why not eat organs? Well, I guess because they have gotten a reputation of being like yucky. I don't want to eat that stuff. That's for the dog, in the best case scenario. And I agree that certain organs don't have a pleasant taste for our modern palate. So liver, for example, if you cook liver, there are some that love it, there are others that hate it. I'm somewhere in between. It's never going to be my favorite food, but I eat it. But others, like heart, for example, it's muscle meat. It tastes like steak. If you close your eyes and eat a piece of heart, you can't tell me that this is heart. You think it's a piece of meat. And so we started including organ meats in our diet, and then we realized, well, getting a steady supply of grass-fed, grass-finished, from local farms, etc.,
Right.
is somewhat of a challenge, especially if you want to get a variety. And we started buying freeze-dried products from some of the brands that I work with. And we've been doing it for a while. And then I realized, you know what, this is actually something we consume every day. I strongly believe this is something we should be consuming every day because it's easy, it's convenient. And the freeze drying only destroys maybe 3 to 5% of the micronutrients. If you cook liver, on the other hand, some of the heat sensitive nutrients might actually get destroyed or significantly reduced in their value. So freeze drying is right in between raw and cooking.
Okay.
And so we realized, this is really something that I want to do by myself, to make sure that I know exactly where the stuff is coming from and I know every step in the supply chain, and B, because I want to do it in a way that's in the most eco-friendly manner, meaning glass bottles, metal lids instead of plastic, because we get so much plastic.
Oh boy.
Um, from a xenoestrogen perspective, that's one thing, but also from just producing trash. If I
Right.
can recycle a glass bottle, even if it's a little bit more expensive, I'd rather do that. And so I decided that, what, I'm going to do that myself, exactly to my specifications. And that's what we did mid of last year. And it's been going really well. There seems to be a lot of hype going on right now around organ meats. I'm happy about that, obviously,
Yeah.
not only because I'm selling those, but also because it shows that people are waking up to the idea that, what we've been doing in the last decades ain't working.
Yeah. Yeah. Go back on that just to retouch on that a little bit. As you were sharing, there's a Dr. Mercola had shared a book, I think, years ago, and he was indicating that, the average human today consumes about 150 pounds of sugar per
Yeah.
year. And 200 years ago or 300 years ago, it was maybe 3 or 4 pounds, and it was
Hmm.
honey and natural sugar for the
Right.
most part. And then people don't really realize this, and some will argue that the skin is not the largest organ in the body. Some will argue that the digestive tract is, and there's good arguments for both of those. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, when you put something on your skin, you're basically eating it.
Right.
And so anything that you're consuming, and so all these things, like you were saying so well, that we have tried to do to make life easy, continue to toxify us, which makes us need to run to the doctor more. And the only option that
Right.
the doctor has is more toxic material
Right.
to add into the mix.
Yeah.
And then people think of liver or some of these things like, well, what are you talking about? Well, you're not going to get poisoned by it. You're going to get healthy nutrition. It might take
Right.
you a little bit of different time to prepare and eat and things of that nature, and I don't eat much fast food at all. I did 30 years ago, but it wasn't even then that much. And an occasional stop there is a whole lot different than if that is your standard American
Right.
diet, right?
Absolutely.
And so, basically, people should look at these kinds of things and say, hey, maybe less is better, a little bit of intermittent fasting. Quality is really
Hmm.
important. And most importantly, I will feel better,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So,
And
or
that's really the main thing. I mean, you can easily judge if something is working or not. I mean, honestly, you can go on whatever diet, be it in a potato diet or whatever, and you can probably lose weight for a little bit, or you might even feel better because there's obviously a mental component. If you're convinced that something is working, then you experience in a different manner. But at some point, that will wear off, and you'll truly feel how you feel.
right.
And it usually ain't pretty unless you're doing the right thing. And I've noticed that myself. I mean, I've been, on the standard American diet and everything. And if at any point in time during that time, if someone would ask me, how do you feel? I would have said, good, because I didn't know any better. I didn't know what it means to truly feel great. And
Such a good
once I've
point.
made that switch, I'm like, whoa. And one good example is I've always had like GI issues, like irritable bowel syndrome and stuff for all of my life. And, my dad had it too. And, my assumption was, well, it's,
Familiar.
genetics. I mean, nothing I can do.
Right.
And when I made the switch to the paleo diet, and funny enough, paleo for me at the time was basically red meat and grilled zucchini. That was my daily, meal. At least once, one of those meals was just red meat and a simple vegetable and nothing else. And then later on, it turned into you can make everything paleo, as long as, and it's so far removed from the idea of Paleolithic eating. But if the ingredients are paleo, then it's paleo. And so some of my issues kept coming back. But I noticed distinctly with that switch in diet, I'm like, wow, I don't have any more issues. I don't feel pain and pressure and nothing. And I've had it all my life, and I thought it was normal, but no, it wasn't. And you really have to step over that boundary to really find out what it means to feel great. And once you feel that, you can tell exactly. If you do one wrong thing and you feel slightly off, you can tell.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful realization, I think, that most people haven't experienced.
And you've kind of, I think you've shared, at least touched on it. You've kind of blended paleo, keto, even, the wise use of vegetables and fruits. Is that kind of what you're, and throwing in organ meats and that as well? Is that kind of a bit of a blend that you're kind of at right now?
It is a bit of a blend. It's still very much animal based. So
Yep.
in other words, a lot of meats, predominantly red, because it's in monogastric, or the meat of monogastric animals, including pork and chicken, they are super high in linoleic acid. Even the pasture raised ones, which is something that I just found out recently, because even those get supplemental feed that
Right.
contains corn and soy that's high in those omega 6s, right? So it's predominantly red meat. Organs, obviously, animal fats, tallow, ghee, but then also, seasonal fruits. I don't shy away from eating fruit. I eat raw honey. I'm not necessarily keto every day, but I have like ketogenic meals, like I just at breakfast, or well, my fast breakfast, right?
Yes. Yep.
Um, half an hour ago. And it was, beef sausages with eggs and avocado. So very much a ketogenic meal. And then I might add in some carbs throughout the day. Especially on days where I work out intensively, where I deplete my glycogen stores. I don't necessarily expect my body to go through gluconeogenesis every single day to make glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, because that doesn't make me feel great in the long run. I've done that for 3 years. And so, yes, it's, seasonal fruits. I do have veggies occasionally. I do have occasionally sweet potatoes, even though, not everyone can handle them well. They're somewhat high in anti-nutrients as well. I do have occasionally like a carrot or so. So I do not I do not cut out all the veggies. I'm by no means a carnivore, a strict carnivore, but I try to be selective and go by how I feel. If something makes me feel good, then evidently I can handle it. If something doesn't make me feel good, even if it's considered healthy, like raw dairy or dairy in general, makes me produce more mucus and I'm more congested and I tend to snore. I love dairy, but I know that my body, even if it's raw and A2, doesn't do well if I have too much of it. So
that's so important to draw that distinction. Listen to your body, and as you go down these roads, you can't, as you're becoming more of a health advocate, you can really start to fine tune some of the things. Oh, I know this is not a good thing for me. So that's really good. What are your thoughts on the red meat? I think is good to have that conversation so that we can demystify some of the negative connotations of red meat. What about seafood, fish, specifically wild caught fish? There are some, I think, values there. Have you found some values in your research and use?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I try to incorporate seafood, not farmed, wild caught, as you said, especially in the evenings, because I feel like I can digest it more easily, probably because there is no collagen in the holding together all those proteins and stuff. So it's a little bit easier to digest for me. But yeah, we eat salmon, we eat sardines, we eat other types of octopus, whatever we can get, either fresh or at least if it was, frozen and it was wild caught, then we incorporate that too. Our kids love seafood. When I was a kid, I would not touch any of that stuff. And I'm really happy that they get to experience all those different foods that most kids wouldn't even look at, because they're only used to macaroni and cheese. And so, yeah, we do eat seafood. I'm not convinced that seafood is necessarily better than red meat. So I wouldn't eat seafood at the exclusion of red meat. I really stick to make most of my protein intake come from ruminant animals, but I don't have any issues with, incorporating seafood as well. And again, it depends a little bit on everyone is slightly different. If your ancestors maybe grew up near the shore, then maybe they had more seafood than mine, so.
Yeah, and it's really hard to find good quality sources, especially ocean sources, because the ocean, it's not like you can find some farm that's a little bit more organic. You can throw some animals on it and keep it pretty good without pesticides, herbicides, and all those types of things, as well as antibiotics and all that. In the ocean, it's a little bit different than in the mountain. When you find a mountain lake and you find some mountain trout that are not so exposed to all that. So, which brings me, you were talking about your kids. You also have been, I think, doing some really good things, helping, and this would be really good for parents with kids or grandparents with kids, some good help on metabolic flexibility. And ultimately, kind of the question that you answer in one of the research things that I looked at was, should kids be on a keto diet, and why would that or could that be beneficial? Maybe touch on that a little bit from, how do we start our kids out liking more than just mac and cheese and carbs?
Right. I mean, the earlier you can start feeding your kids real food, the better it is, because once they've gotten a taste and their palates have turned, with all the processed carbs and everything and added sugars and artificial whatnot, it can be challenging to steer that boat around. I know that when our daughter was born, for the first couple of years, we have pictures of her, eating like a chunk of bread. And I'm like, how could we have, why? But we didn't know any better at the time. She is 8 now, and she is now, on the same diet as we are. And the young one, fortunately, he was born into a time where we already had made all of those changes, or most of them.
Right.
So he got used to that from the beginning, fortunately. But honestly, I would just, start with the lowest hanging fruit, and that is cutting out sugary drinks. I mean, there is no need to drink anything for kids but water. They don't need, and if you have to, then there's flavored water that uses natural flavors. So maybe if it comes in a glass bottle, fine. But juice boxes and all of that stuff, I would immediately cut out. Then the more of the carb overload you can mitigate, I think the easier it will be for them to kind of reset the taste palates,
right,
and also then be able to switch to fat burning mode, which goes back to that metabolic flexibility to switch back and forth between using glucose and fat for fuel. The good news is kids have relatively small glycogen stores, so they are quickly depleted, which is why they are so quickly in ketosis. And it always frustrates me, when I have like carbs and then 2 hours later they're in ketosis. And I'm like, how can that be? If I do that, it takes me a day because their glycogen stores are quicker depleted. And so unless you've been feeding your kids on processed sugars for 20 years, there is a good chance that you can relatively quickly, change course by, again, removing processed carbs, cooking meals yourself at home, using real ingredients and prepare the meals from scratch. That's really, and even if you don't follow, an animal-based diet or whatever diet you follow, if you do it, if you use real ingredients, cook your meals from scratch, chances are you're way better off than, popping a macaroni and cheese in the microwave and hoping for the best, or making, a quick, sandwich or, toast with jelly or what have you.
Right.
So that would be, my first thing, like really. And there are also, I wouldn't necessarily recommend living off those, but if you need like an easy transition, there are some ketogenic products that taste sweet, that are maybe sweetened with stevia or monk fruit, that kind of give the kids the sense of they're eating something sweet, but it doesn't increase or it doesn't raise their blood sugar. And that could be an easy way to transition. And we've used some of that. Perfect Keto is one of those brands that we've, bought products from in the past. They have stuff that's pretty clean. I'm not a big fan of nuts,
Right.
because they're also high in certain omega-6s and anti-nutrients. But if you need that to make a transition to a more animal-based or more species-appropriate diet for humans, then by all means, do that, and then remove the regular candy bar with a ketogenic one if it has clean ingredients. There is a lot of keto stuff out there that's just as bad as the original one, because they use, cheap ingredients, seed oils, etc. But if you find clean ingredients, that's a good way to transition. And then just take it step by step and try. If there is one tip that I would give any parents, is only have at home what your kids are allowed to eat.
Okay, I like
because
that.
Then there is no fight. There is no, you can't have that. Daddy can have it, but you can't because we want you to eat better. Well, if our kids say, I'm hungry, I want to get a snack, I'm like, go to the pantry. Whatever you find, chances are you can have it, because we only have stuff at home that we eat and that we want them to eat. So you basically remove that whole discussion from the equation, because if there is a lot of candy bars and Snickers and all of that in the pantry, then, arguing why they can't have that, even though if it's at home, it's kind of difficult. Why do you have it? If you're not supposed to eat it. If you don't have it, no discussion.
That is so good. Basically keeping on, kind of the kids, but also it has applications for, like what you just said, if we're kind of kidding ourselves in so many ways, we have something for ourselves that we don't let our kids have.
Right.
So it doesn't actually help them make good choices for, hey, occasionally I tell this in my office all the time. I say, I try to teach 80-10-10, something that I learned from, educators in the past. Hey, if we did 80% of the time pretty darn good, we'd be so far ahead as a culture, individually and collectively, compared to the standard American diet.
Absolutely.
Like you say, if you just did some of these things, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you just went to, for me, I say, if God's made it, it's great. And if man's messed with it, you're in trouble, kind of thing. So if you get as close to the original, you're going to be far ahead. But then 10% of the time, you're going to go off the rail a little bit. And 10% of the time, you're going to go completely off the rails, which happens a lot of times around holidays and special occasions. But if we can help our children navigate that, that's really, important, so that, so that we don't turn the limbic system into, I have to have more and more sugar. And our palate, that kind of thing. So I'm off on a rabbit trail there. I want to come back to what I was going to get to. Baby starts out, and you point this out too, with very little exposure to carbohydrates, right? If they're nursing, what about that transition that people always try to make from, hey, the nursing, which is the best they can have at least for a year, but then we try to transition them into a lot of these carbs and things, and then we also have this kind of American kind of approach to saying we have to have 3 meals and snacks in between. And we kind of start them off that way, don't we, as kids? And then we kind of try to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, funny enough, because I, get that question asked a lot, because in one of my articles, I said babies breastfed babies are in ketosis. But there is, sugar in the breast milk, obviously, but it goes back to the size of, a baby's glycogen stores. They burn through the stuff so quickly that they are still in ketosis. There is also fat, obviously, in milk. And so they are still in ketosis despite getting that glucose or that sugar from the breast milk. But once you, and I agree, breastfeed as long as you can. I mean, because whatever comes next, chances are it's going to be way worse than what they got through the breast milk, because there is no, and even formula. Our son was born prematurely at 30 weeks and 6 days, I believe.
Okay.
So he was way early, and they were afraid that he wouldn't grow fast enough because he was already tiny in the womb. They thought there may be some growth restriction going on or whatever. I think he's just as tall as mom is, because she's not the tallest one either. Her parents are not the tallest ones either. But anyway, so they said, maybe you can supplement with formula. And I looked at the most expensive, best formula we could get our hands on, and it was seed oils and soy. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Is this the best baby food we have in this country? And yes, it was. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to do, but the only thing we can do is, we keep breastfeeding as long as you can, keep pumping as long as you can, so we can give him all of that. And then at some point, we started actually, once he could have like real food, we started with very high fat food, so avocado and stuff, not Rice Krispies, which our daughter got when she was young, and then all the veggies, that are so good for the kids. I'm like, no, I would actually feed them from the get-go, probably liver and organs and meat ground, make it soft, make it, put in a food processor. I mean, obviously, work with your pediatrician to make sure you're not doing anything that's counterproductive. There are certain things that babies shouldn't have, at least not in the beginning, until you figured out if there is maybe potentially intolerance or, allergic reaction or what have you. But think about it. What do you think the babies of our ancestors got once they were done breastfeeding?
Right.
It was not Rice Krispies, Right. Chances are it wasn't sweet potatoes either,
Right.
It was probably whatever they had. I mean, yes, fruit, fine, seasonal fruit, not a problem. But I would go with as much high fat stuff as possible, and proteins, obviously, and then carbs are fine too. But it's usually the baby food. If you look at what the first jars or whatever, it's like 100% carbs, from plants that have antinutrients, that have chemicals, defense chemicals that are maybe not good for our body. I mean, maybe I can handle that because I've built up my defenses. A baby, I don't know, maybe. So, I generally speaking, I would go the exact opposite direction of what the mainstream tells you.
Yeah, that convenient approach, and it's really only convenient because that's what you're being taught. It's kind of, if you're taught something that's healthy, it becomes convenient because that's your
right.
your normal.
You don't have to think, it's the decision has been made,
Yeah, exactly. So, we're kind of wrapping up close on time here, but you had one really good take home there, only keep in your pantry what kids can eat. That's not something that they can eat. I really like that.
And then also helps the parents or the adults, because I know if there is something at home that I shouldn't have, but it's there, I'm like, I'm going to eat it. Because then at least it's not there anymore, So it's not only the kids.
That's funny. What's another good take-home point? Maybe something we haven't covered yet that you think is a good take-home point, just a good standard to live by.
Be uncomfortable. Embrace the discomfort. Being comfortable is not good. It has not helped us to become who we are today as a species by being comfortable, being wrapped in warm clothes, by having hot water all the time, by having food whenever we want to, whenever we feel like this little, sensation of hunger, we go to the fridge and eat something. That's the exact opposite of what we should be doing, So be uncomfortable, take cold showers, take a cold plunge or an ice bath, go into a sauna, fast, don't eat, skip a meal, work out until you're on the floor and can't move anymore, Don't overdo any of those things, but do them on a regular basis, because only if we are uncomfortable, we get better, more resilient, and healthier overall.
Very, very good. I have just recently started adding cold plunges into my world from a previous interview with Thomas Seeger. And I'm not into the 35 degrees. I'm into the 50 degrees 3 times a week. And that was his point. He says, hey, get into a temperature that scares you.
Right.
Get in when you want to get in. get out when you want to get out. And of course, when we're dealing with cold plunges, we always have to consider hypothermia. So, basically 2 minutes to 4 minutes is a good enough treatment time. You don't have to risk hypothermia with that typically, but if it's 30 seconds and you're uncomfortable, get out. But the whole idea is not is to understand that when we're talking about these kind of things that make us uncomfortable, we're actually stressing the body to be healthier because it's designed to react in a positive way to those stresses that we give it rather than a negative way. Unless, like we talked earlier, you keep adding on stress on top of stress. There's that balance. But at the core of what we're talking about, whether it's a heat stress, a cold stress, a cardio stress, a lifting stress, these are all designed to make the cell work better, which means the whole body is better. So I love that. So be uncomfortable.
There is a distinction obviously between chronic stress and like ad hoc stressors, as the ones you just mentioned, and that's an important. But you don't want to do both necessarily. Fix your chronic stress, manage that better so you can do the beneficial stressors that make you more resilient. The chronic stress is not going to make you any better. It's going to make you sick,
Right. I love that. Where does one come to follow up with you, and how do you actually interact with those? I mean, you do have that organ meet opportunity, but do you actually do life and health coaching? What are some of the things you do, and how do people follow you?
Yeah. Well, I can be found on Instagram. mkummer82, I think is my handle there, or if you search for Michael Kummer, you'll find me. michaelkummer.com is my blog, so that's where I put out most of my stuff. I have a same YouTube channel of the same name, where I put out my videos. But no, I don't do any coaching. I mean, I coach like family and friends if they want to hear what I have to say, but not in any organized or commercial manner. But I'm always happy to people reach out to me. They ask me questions. If I have an answer, I give it to them. As much, as long as time permits, of course. Hit me up on Instagram. That's where you see some of the stuff that I do, like, with the dog, with the kids and stuff, how we, interact. And that's less formal, I guess, than some of the blog posts that I put out.
And then you have a website as well, I believe.
Yeah, michaelkummer.com. That's the blog. And then shop.michaelkummer.com is where I sell the organ meats. Okay,
cool. Hey, well, any final thoughts before we go?
Just take it step by step. Don't have those huge lofty goals. Don't try to be, the next you or the next me. If you've never done any of that before, take baby steps. Just make a little bit of progress every single day and embrace that success, that win. And because that's going to motivate you to keep going. If you just do, have like this lofty goal and you never reach that, you get demotivated and go back to your old habits. Small steps, and you'll get there. It's a journey for all of us,
There is, absolutely. And I really appreciate it. And I just encourage everyone to check out what you're doing. It's an encouragement. It's motivating. It's really cool to see how you're working with your family, with your kids, and bringing them up in a way that gives them a really good opportunity to be healthy and be able to make good life and health choices, be their own health advocates. I think that's a wonderful thing that you're doing. So hope everybody checks back in with you, and have a great day.
Thanks, Damon. I appreciate it.